I was disowned for chasing my dreams, and they called me selfish, while loyal child sister got everything. Now I'm the villain in their story, and then For as long as I can remember, I've been the go-to person in my family. Need someone to pick up groceries? Call me. Something broken in the house? Ethan can fix it. My dad, Greg, leaned on me for everything. And Sophia, my younger sister? She somehow managed to slip through life without lifting a finger. That's just the way it was. By the time I was 20, I had already put my life on hold to help out at home. College plans delayed, social life non-existent, career goals pushed aside. It was all about keeping things running smoothly for my dad and Sophia. I thought it was just what families did. But as the years dragged on, it started to feel less like being there for family and more like being stuck. When I turned 32, everything changed. A job offer came through, a management position in Chicago. It was the kind of opportunity I dreamed about, the kind of role I'd worked years to achieve. I felt a spark I hadn't felt in forever. For once, I saw the way out of the endless cycle. I was nervous about telling Greg, but I thought he'd understand. I'd been carrying so much for so long. Surely he'd be proud of me, right? I decided to break the news over dinner. That night, I sat across from him at the kitchen table. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. My hands felt clammy, but I pushed through. Dad, I need to tell you something. I started. I got a job offer in Chicago. It's a big opportunity. They want me to start next month. Greg stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then he put down his fork and leaned back in his chair. So, you're just leaving? Walking out on us? His voice was calm, but I could feel the storm brewing underneath. It's not like that, I said quickly. I've been here all this time, helping out, making sure everything's okay. This job, it's what I've been working toward. It's not just a job, Dad. It's a career. Greg's face hardened. Family comes first, Ethan. Always. What happened to that? What happened to everything I taught you? I felt my chest tighten. Dad, this isn't about leaving you behind. I've been here my whole life. I've given up so much to help out. But I can't stay in this town forever. His hand slammed down on the table, rattling the silverware. You're abandoning your responsibilities. This family has a tradition of sticking together, and you're breaking that. You're choosing yourself over us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was he serious? Did he really not see all the sacrifices I'd made? It's not about choosing, Dad. I need to do this, for me. For my future. Greg didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, his jaw clenched. Then he stood up, shaking his head. If you leave, don't bother coming back, he said. You're making it clear where your priorities lie. I was stunned. I sat there as he walked out of the room, feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. The next few days were a blur. Greg refused to talk to me, and when I tried to bring it up again, he shut me down completely. Meanwhile, Sophia, who hadn't contributed much to the household in years, suddenly started spending more time with him. I heard through a cousin that she was moving back into the house, rent-free, no questions asked. The day I packed up my things and left for Chicago, Greg didn't even say goodbye. Sophia didn't either. As I drove out of town, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I was finally breaking free, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving behind a part of myself. Chicago was everything I'd hoped it would be: bustling streets, endless opportunities, a chance to start fresh. But the fallout from my decision followed me like a shadow. I learned through relatives that Greg was telling anyone who would listen that I'd abandoned the family. Ethan's selfish, he'd say. He left us to fend for ourselves. Sophia's the only one I can count on. Sophia played right into it. She posted photos of her and Greg on social media, all smiles and captions like, "Family is everything." It felt like a slap in the face. I was the one who had always been there, the one who sacrificed the most. But now, I was the bad guy. Friends started messaging me, asking why I'd left. Even some relatives reached out to tell me I'd made a mistake. It was like no one understood why I had to leave, why staying wasn't an option anymore. The breaking point came at a family event I didn't even know about until I saw the photos online. There was Greg, standing in the middle of a crowd, raising a glass. "I've got a family I can count on," he announced, according to one of my cousins. Sophia's always been there for me. Not like Ethan. When I heard that, something in me snapped. I'd given up so much for that family, and now I was being painted as the villain. I thought about reaching out, about trying to explain my side. But every time I considered it, I remembered Greg's words, "Don't bother coming back." In Chicago, I was trying to build a new life, but the weight of it all was crushing me. The guilt, the anger, the betrayal. It was too much. I started questioning everything. Was I wrong to leave? Should I have stayed, even if it meant giving up my dreams? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Moving to Chicago was supposed to be a fresh start, but the fallout from leaving my family hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about being in a new city or starting a new job. It was the constant nagging feeling that I had left something unfinished back home, something that was unraveling faster than I could keep track of. At first, I tried to focus on my new life. My apartment was small but cozy, and the city buzzed with opportunities. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the echoes of Greg's words. But no matter how hard I worked or how late I stayed at the office, the shadows of what I'd left behind crept in. The first sign that things were worse than I thought came from a text message. It was from a cousin back home, someone I hadn't heard from in months. "Hey, Ethan. Just wanted to let you know your dad's been saying some stuff about you. You okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "What kind of stuff?" The reply came quickly. "He's telling people you abandoned the family, that you left him and Sophia to handle everything. I thought you should know." My stomach sank. It wasn't just Greg refusing to speak to me. He was actively turning the family against me. Later that week, I got a call from Jake, my best friend in Chicago. He'd been a solid support system since I moved, always ready with a drink and some advice when I needed it. "Man, you gotta see this," Jake said, sending me a link to Sophia's latest post. I clicked it and felt my blood boil. It was a picture of her and Greg, smiling in front of the house I'd grown up in. The caption read, "Family is everything. Some people forget that, but we never will." Jake shook his head when I looked up from my phone. "They're really going all in?" "Huh? It's like they're rubbing it in," I said, tossing my phone onto the table. "She's living rent-free with my dad, playing the perfect daughter, while I'm here busting my ass to make something of myself. And everyone thinks I'm the bad guy." Jake poured me another drink. "Forget them, man. You're doing what you need to do. Let them talk." But it wasn't that easy. Relatives started calling me, some to lecture, others to guilt trip. One uncle said, "You know, Ethan, family is all we have. Your dad's hurt. Maybe you should apologize and go back home." Apologize? For what? For trying to build a life? For taking an opportunity I'd worked years to earn? The tipping point came when I heard about a family barbecue back home. I hadn't been invited, of course, but the photos made their way to my feed. There was Greg at the center, holding court like the proud patriarch, with Sophia by his side. I stared at the pictures longer than I should have. Everyone looked so happy, like they'd all moved on without me. Jake found me staring at my phone that night. "Ethan, you've got to stop letting this get to you," he said. "They're doing this to get under your skin. Don't let them win." "I know," I said, "but it feels like I'm being erased. Like everything I did for them didn't matter." "You can't change how they see things," Jake said, "but you can control what you do next. Focus on your life here. Let them deal with their own mess." It was good advice, but harder to follow than I expected. Every time I thought I was making progress, something pulled me back. Like the time Aunt Linda reached out. She was one of the few relatives who had always supported me. "I don't know how you've stayed so calm," she said over the phone. "I saw what your dad posted in the family chat. He called you selfish and lazy." Lazy? After everything you've done for him? I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. "What did he say exactly?" "He told everyone that you left the family to fend for themselves. That Sophia's the only one who's ever been loyal. It's not right, Ethan. You deserve better." Hearing that hurt more than I wanted to admit. Aunt Linda meant well, but every word felt like salt in an open wound. I decided to try reaching out to Greg one more time. Maybe if I explained everything, if I laid it all out, he'd finally understand. I spent hours drafting an email, outlining every sacrifice I'd made, Every time I'd put the family's needs ahead of my own. I poured my heart into it, hoping it would make a difference. Instead, it made things worse. Greg forwarded the email to the entire family, twisting my words to make me look even worse. He told everyone I was playing the victim, trying to guilt-trip him into forgiving me. The fallout was immediate. Relatives who had been neutral turned against me. My phone blew up with messages, most of them angry or disappointed. "Ethan, how could you write something like that?" one cousin said. "Your dad's been through so much. Have some respect." I couldn't believe it. No matter what I said or did, I was the villain in their story. Sophia, of course, took the opportunity to pile on. She started posting cryptic messages on Instagram about ungrateful siblings and how real family shows up when it matters. She knew exactly what she was doing, and it worked. People started messaging me, asking why I couldn't just be there for my family. I wanted to scream. I had been there for years. I had put my life on hold for them. And now that I was finally doing something for myself, I was the bad guy? One day, Jake sat me down and said, "Ethan, you can't keep living like this. You're letting them control your life from miles away. Cut them off if you have to, but stop letting them drag you down." He was right, but it was easier said than done. My family's words stuck with me, no matter how hard I tried to shake them. The guilt, the anger, the frustration. It was all consuming. I wasn't sure how to fix things, or if I even should. All I knew was that the weight of it all was becoming unbearable, and I wasn't sure how much more I could take. The longer I stayed in Chicago, the more I realized that no matter how far I was from home, the mess I'd left behind wasn't going to stay there. The weight of it all, Greg's accusations, Sophia's antics, the whispers from family, followed me like a dark cloud. I knew I couldn't ignore it forever, so I decided to confront Greg. I'd spent weeks going over what I would say, practicing how to keep my cool. I thought maybe if I talked to him, really explained myself, he'd finally see where I was coming from. When I called, the conversation was over before it even began. "Dad, it's me," I said cautiously. "What do you want?" His tone was cold, like I was a telemarketer interrupting his day. "I just wanted to talk. Clear the air," I said. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand, and I think we need to—" "I don't need to do anything, Ethan," he interrupted. "You made your choice when you left. Now you have to live with it." "It wasn't about leaving you behind," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "It was about taking a chance to build a future. I've been there for you and Sophia my entire life. You can't act like I just walked away without a second thought." Greg scoffed. "You're playing the victim, as usual. Poor Ethan, the one who had to sacrifice everything. Do you even hear yourself?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, you don't get it. I delayed college to help with bills. I stayed in that house for years, fixing things, running errands, making sure you and Sophia were okay. And now she's living with you, doing nothing, while you act like she's the hero and I'm the villain. Don't you dare bring Sophia into this," he snapped. "She's been here when it counts, unlike you." The anger I'd been holding back spilled over. "What does she even do, Dad? She posts pictures online and pretends she's the perfect daughter while I'm out here trying to make something of myself." "Enough," Greg said sharply. "I don't have time for this. You're selfish, Ethan, and you always have been. Don't call me again unless you're ready to apologize." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Later that evening, Sophia decided to chime in. She sent me a long message, laying into me for leaving her to pick up the slack with Dad. "Do you know how hard it's been for me?" she wrote. "I'm the one who's actually here, dealing with everything. You wouldn't understand because you ran away." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Sophia had done nothing for years. I was the one who stayed behind to keep everything together while she lived her carefree life. And now she had the audacity to paint herself as the martyr? I ignored her message, but she didn't stop. The next day, I saw one of her Instagram posts. "It's hard being the only one who cares, but some of us know what family really means." Relatives started reaching out again, taking sides. Some supported me, saying they understood why I left. But others echoed Greg's sentiments, calling me selfish and ungrateful. "You abandoned your family," one of them wrote. No one forced you to leave. You chose this. The divide was growing, and it felt like I was standing in the middle of a battlefield, taking fire from every direction. Then, to make things even worse, a cousin sent me screenshots of texts between Greg and some other relatives. In the messages, Greg called me lazy, entitled, and ungrateful. He left us high and dry. One of the texts read, "Sophia's the only one who cares about this family. Ethan's too busy chasing his selfish dreams to bother with us anymore." I couldn't believe it. This was the man I'd spent my whole life trying to support, the man I'd sacrificed so much for. And now he was turning everyone against me, twisting the truth to make me look like the bad guy. I decided I couldn't stay silent any longer. I wrote an email to Greg, laying out everything I'd done for the family, every sacrifice, every late night spent helping out, every dream I'd put on hold. I wasn't trying to guilt him. I just wanted him to understand. But instead of responding to me, Greg forwarded the email to the entire family. He added his own commentary, claiming I was trying to manipulate him and make myself look like the victim. The fallout was immediate. My phone blew up with messages from angry relatives, accusing me of stirring up drama and trying to make Greg look bad. "You've gone too far this time," one of them wrote. "Your dad doesn't deserve this." I felt like I was suffocating. No matter what I said or did, the narrative was always the same. Ethan is the selfish one. Ethan is the problem. Sophia, of course, took the opportunity to fan the flames. She started posting vague messages on Instagram, calling out certain people who couldn't handle the truth about family loyalty. It was obvious she was talking about me. I tried to ignore it, but then I found out something that pushed me over the edge. A cousin let it slip that Greg had given Sophia money to start a business, money he had refused to give me when I needed it for school years ago. I couldn't believe it. Sophia, who had never lifted a finger to help anyone, was being handed opportunities on a silver platter while I'd been left to fend for myself. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake by leaving. But then I thought about everything I'd endured, everything I'd given up for a family that didn't appreciate me. Jake's words echoed in my head. You can't keep letting them control your life. Cut them off if you have to. I wasn't ready to cut them off completely, not yet, but I was starting to realize that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix this. Greg and Sophia had made up their minds about me, and nothing I said or did was going to change that. It was a hard pill to swallow, but maybe it was time to stop trying to prove myself to people who didn't care. The more I tried to keep my distance, the more the drama seemed to pull me back. It wasn't just Greg or Sophia anymore. Relatives started getting involved, voicing their opinions as if they knew the full story. It felt like the entire family had become a courtroom, and I was on trial for daring to live my life. Then came the news that sent my anger into overdrive. One day, my cousin Kelly called, hesitating as she spoke. "Ethan, you should know. Sophia went through your old room," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "She threw a lot of your stuff away. Old photos, letters, keepsakes. She called it cleaning, but it's obvious she didn't care what she was getting rid of." I felt a flash of heat rise to my face. Those weren't just things. They were pieces of my life. Memories from a childhood that felt a world away now. I immediately called my mom, hoping she'd step in. "Mom, you can't let her get away with this," I said. "Those were my belongings." She had no right. My mom sighed, sounding as if the situation was exhausting her. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't know until it was too late. I didn't want to get in the middle of this." "That's not good enough," I snapped. "She doesn't get to destroy my things and walk away like it's nothing. It's just a family matter, Ethan. You know how these things are," she said, brushing it off as if it wasn't a big deal. Family matter. That phrase had started to feel like an excuse for every toxic behavior I'd had to endure. I confronted Sophia directly, sending her a message that barely contained my fury. She replied almost immediately, dismissing me as if I were overreacting. "Relax, Ethan," she wrote. "Most of it was junk anyway. You left it behind, so I figured it didn't matter to you." Junk. That's how she described the photos of my high school graduation, letters from friends I hadn't seen in years, and mementos from a life I'd put on hold for the family. I couldn't let it go. Without warning, I drove back to the town I had tried so hard to leave behind. My plan was simple: retrieve whatever was left of my belongings and put an end to this once and for all. When I arrived at Greg's house, I barely made it to the front door before he intercepted me. He stood in the doorway, blocking my path like a sentry guarding a fortress. "You don't belong here," he said flatly. "This is still my family's house." I shot back. "I'm here for my stuff, and then I'll be out of your way." Greg folded his arms. "You gave up that right when you walked out on us. You don't live here anymore, Ethan. You don't get to barge in whenever you feel like it." I tried to reason with him, but it was like talking to a brick wall. He refused to let me in, refusing even to acknowledge that my belongings had any value. I could feel Sophia watching from the window, her silhouette barely visible through the curtains. She wasn't going to step in, not to defend herself, and certainly not to help me. When I left that day, empty-handed and furious, I knew I couldn't let it go. I contacted a lawyer to explore my options. I wasn't going to let them erase me from the family entirely, not like this. The lawyer explained the basics of my rights, but it wasn't an easy battle. Even so, knowing I had some legal standing gave me a glimmer of hope. But Sophia wasn't done stirring the pot. She started spreading rumors that I was trying to sue Greg for money. Family members began whispering, and before I knew it, the narrative had shifted again. Now I was not only selfish but also greedy. The only person who reached out to support me was Aunt Linda. She had always been the voice of reason in a sea of chaos. "Ethan, I'm so sorry for everything you're going through," she said. "But you have to know this isn't new. Your dad has always favored Sophia because she's easier to control. She does what he wants without question." I nodded, even though her words felt like a gut punch. Hearing it out loud somehow made it worse, like all the years I'd spent trying to prove myself to Greg had been for nothing. One day, while going through old messages, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a text Greg had sent me years ago, back when I was still running errands for him and doing whatever I could to keep the family afloat. In it, he promised me the family home one day. "You've earned it, Ethan. You've always been the one to take care of things. This house will be yours." Looking back now, it was laughable. The promise had likely been a way to keep me tied to the house, to keep me from leaving. And now, it was clear that Sophia was being groomed to take my place. The final blow came when I learned that Greg had co-signed a loan for Sophia's failing business. This was the same man who had refused to help me pay for college, who had told me I needed to figure things out on my own. I felt the resentment building inside me, threatening to consume me. I wanted to confront them again, to demand answers. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. Greg and Sophia had already decided who I was in their story. The selfish son, the absent sibling, the one who abandoned them when they needed me most. I started pulling back, cutting off contact bit by bit. I couldn't keep fighting a battle I was destined to lose. I had spent my entire life trying to fix this family, but nothing ever changed. The more I focused on my own life, the clearer it became. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for people who didn't appreciate it. It was a painful realization, but a necessary one. I had tried to be everything they needed, but it was never enough. Now, it was time to focus on what I needed, to let go of the past and start building a future that didn't revolve around their approval. Months passed, and I tried to settle into a life that didn't involve Greg or Sophia. It wasn't easy. Every now and then, I'd hear about something they said or did. Another jab at my character, another reminder of how thoroughly they'd painted me as the villain. But I kept my distance, determined to focus on myself for once. Then I got a call from Aunt Linda. Her tone was serious, almost hesitant. "Ethan, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but your dad's health is declining. It's not looking good." I didn't know what to feel. Greg and I hadn't spoken in months, and the last conversation we had was nothing short of a disaster. Part of me thought, maybe this is the push we need to fix things. But another part of me, the part that had carried years of resentment, asked, why bother? Relatives started pressuring me almost immediately. "Ethan, you should make amends," they said. "He's your father. You don't want to regret this later." The word regret stuck with me. I didn't want to look back years from now and wonder if I'd done enough. But the thought of stepping back into that toxic environment made my chest tighten. Still, I decided to go. I didn't call ahead or warn anyone. I just showed up at Greg's house. When I walked through the door, the tension hit me like a wall. The house looked different, older, like it had aged along with its owner. Greg was lying in bed, looking friendlier than I'd ever seen him. His once commanding presence had been reduced to a shadow of itself. Sophia was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed into a glare. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. "I heard about Dad," I said. "I wanted to see how he's doing." Sophia scoffed. "Oh, now you care? After leaving us to deal with everything?" I ignored her and walked into Greg's room. He looked up at me, his face expressionless. "You decided to show up," he said flatly. "I'm here, aren't I?" I replied. "I thought maybe we could talk." Greg shook his head. "Talk about what?" "How you left. How you put yourself above this family." I sighed. "Dad, I came because I heard you weren't doing well. I'm trying to do the right thing here. Can we just put everything aside for a minute?" But Greg wasn't ready to let go. He brought up every perceived slight, every moment he thought I'd failed him. Sophia chimed in too, accusing me of abandoning her when she needed me most. "You don't get it, do you?" I finally snapped. "I spent my whole life putting this family first. I stayed when I wanted to leave. I gave up opportunities so I could help you. And now, because I finally did something for myself, I'm the bad guy? Do you know how unfair that is?" Sophia rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, Ethan. You're not a saint. Stop acting like a victim." I turned to her, my voice steady. "I'm not acting like a victim. I'm telling the truth. You wouldn't know what that looks like because you've never had to sacrifice anything." The room fell silent. For a moment, it felt like all the years of tension had boiled over, spilling into every corner of that house. That night, I left with no clearer resolution than when I arrived. Greg still saw me as a traitor, and Sophia was too wrapped up in her own narrative to see the truth. A few weeks later, Greg passed away. The news hit harder than I expected, not because we were close, but because it felt like the door to any possible reconciliation had slammed shut forever. There would be no apology, no acknowledgement of the sacrifices I'd made. Then came the inheritance drama. I learned that Greg had left me more than I'd anticipated, including a portion of the family home. Sophia, predictably, was furious. He manipulated Dad into changing the will. She told anyone who would listen. "He doesn't deserve a dime." Her accusations didn't stop there. She started telling relatives I'd only come back to see Greg because I wanted the inheritance. It was another jab, another twist of the knife, but I didn't engage. I used the inheritance to pay off old debts and invest in my future. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to give me some breathing room. Meanwhile, Sophia's true colors began to show. Relatives who had once sided with her started to distance themselves. "She's always been manipulative," one cousin admitted. "I just didn't see it until now." It was bittersweet. On one hand, it felt good to be vindicated. On the other, it was too late to fix anything. Greg was gone, and the family dynamics were beyond repair. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to fix things. I stopped chasing their approval, stopped trying to prove myself to people who would never see my worth. Instead, I focused on the life I was building. I surrounded myself with friends who felt more like family than Greg or Sophia ever had. I found peace in the small victories, making progress at work, finding a sense of belonging in Chicago, learning how to live without the constant weight of guilt. Looking back, I realized I had spent years trying to hold on to something that wasn't worth saving. The sacrifices I made, the pain I endured, it all taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away. I'll never forget the family I grew up with, but I no longer let them define me. I've moved on, and for the first time in years, I feel free.